This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the all-in-one platform to build a beautiful online presence. Hello everyone and welcome to another video. Today I wanted to speak to you about a whole bunch of witchy books which I think would be great to read around Halloween and the spooky season. Now many of you guys know that I really love witches. I love this motif and archetype within literature. I find it really interesting. I think because I grew up reading like a lot of witchy books, like I just have a really sort of deep love for witches. And so I picked out a whole bunch of books which I thought would be good to read around this time period. In honor of today's video, I am actually wearing the witchiest thing I own. So this dress is a dress that I bought for a wedding maybe a month ago. It's very witchy. Look at these sleeves. Look at these sleeves. Without further ado, let's just jump straight into the video. And here are 8 wonderful witchy books to read for the Halloweeny season. The very first book I want to recommend to you is this one, which is the Virago Book of Witches by Sharuk Hussein. Now you would have seen this book in my magical dark academia reading video, the one where I read Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell. Honestly, the main reason I was drawn to it was because of the cover. I think it has a really beautiful, interesting cover. I really love all of the little illustrations on it. Also, I wanted to read it because it had Virago in the title. Virago was the publisher which was most closely associated with Angela Carter. This book is a compilation of witchy stories from all around the world. Sharuk Hussein is a folklorist and she does a really amazing job of compiling like lots and lots of different kinds of witchy stories. Like we don't just have European witchy stories here. One of them is an Indigenous Australian witchy story. There's stories from India and a whole bunch of different other countries, and so it's really good in terms of getting an image of witches and this archetype from all over the world. The stories are really interestingly written. I like the style. The style does differ between the stories, and overall I just think it's a really good compilation of little witchy stories, and it's honestly a really good historical look at the witchy archetype. And again, just such a beautiful cover. I just love things that are cluttered. I think it's really pretty. Anyway, yes, I love the cover, but also this is just a beautiful book. It's really good, and I definitely recommend reading it if you want to read some witchy things. The second book I want to recommend is Cersei by Madeline Miller. I recently listened to the audiobook for this and it was just so very brilliant. Now Cersei, the book, is a retelling of the myths of Cersei, the daughter of Helios, who was the god of the sun in Greek mythology. Cersei is one of the first witches in like Western myth and folklore, along with Hecate, and so she's a really influential figure within like witches and our idea of witches in the West. I really loved this book. I thought it was just so beautifully written. I thought it was really interesting and really engaging, and I loved the way it weaved together so many different myths in this sort of like epic coming of age story. Like it really did feel like a big huge Bildungsroman for Cersei and her life, and I thought it was very tragic and very beautiful, but like really strong, very well written, and it like integrated so many different characters from Greek myth. Like I don't know how many of those characters actually interacted with Cersei. If we read like the original like Greek myths and stuff, I don't remember her coming up that regularly, but I really loved that we got to see like Ariadne and the Labyrinth. We got to see like a whole bunch of different people. I really loved listening to this audiobook. I thought it was just so genuinely wonderful, and it looks at, as I said, Cersei as one of like the original witches. She discovers pharmakeia, and so that's like pharmacy, magic, potions and stuff. Cersei has a really quite challenging life. She's not really accepted by her family. Her dad is god of the sun, Helios, and so she is one of many children. She's a nymph, so she's not treated very well, and we just sort of get to see Cersei being really like resilient, and she has a really good story. There's a lot of like natural imagery here. I thought it was really wonderful. I loved this book, and I thought it was just a very good read and a very good witchy story, but with a Greek myth spin on it. Book number 3 on this list is another one that I read recently, and it is The Familiars by Stacey Halls. I got recommended this, I believe, by someone in our book club over on Patreon. One of the like best parts of Patreon and the little community we have there is that there's so many like good book recommendations that come out of there, and it makes me really happy. But I read The Familiars by Stacey Halls, which is essentially a fictionalized retelling of the story of the Pendle witches, who were hanged on the hill next to Pendle. Pendle is a town, I think, in the north of England, in like the early 1600s. And so the people in this story, like Fleetwood, the main character, I was like, who names their kid Fleetwood? Like, it's a beautiful name, but like that is like such an out there choice from the author. That was actually the person's name. And so I thought that was really cool. And it sort of like draws from history to like make this like fictionalized story about this young woman who's living in a house. She wants to have a baby, but she's she's really struggling, and the young woman named Alice who becomes her midwife, who is linked with the sort of like witch trials that are going on in this town. I thought this was a really, really good story. It's a really good look at sort of like witch trials that were happening in England at the time in the early 1600s. And so basically this is looking at like the perspective of like an upper class woman who is trying to protect someone who was accused of witchcraft. In this story, we're sort of looking at Fleetwood's perspective. She is quite young, I believe. I think she's like 18 or something like this. She got married at like 14. I felt like it was really well researched and it felt really strong, and I felt like I got a really good insight into Northern England okay, so in the story, Macbeth has just come out, so it's probably like 1606 or 7 or something like that. There's references to Shakespeare because at this point in history, Shakespeare is still alive, which I thought was cool. She has a dog named Puck, obviously named after the mischievous fairy from Midsummer Night's Dream. Anyway, I really love this story. I thought it was beautifully written. If you're interested in like looking at like the 1600s, the like witch trials of the early modern period and that kind of stuff, this is a really, really good book for that. Okay, and before we move on to the next books on this list, I just wanted to thank the sponsor of this video, which is Squarespace. Squarespace is a website builder which allows people to create lovely, aesthetically pleasing websites. As of this month, my website turns 1 year old. So that means I've been using Squarespace for a whole year, and honestly, I can't tell you enough how much I love it. The platform is super easy to use, there are loads of templates to choose from, and with the ability to drag and drop modules, you can customize it and make everything look exactly how you want. Squarespace has a whole bunch of benefits, from powerful blogging tools to help you categorize, share, and schedule posts, to its wonderful analytics features. Squarespace makes it easy to connect with the people who are interested in what you make. If you're looking to make a website, head to squarespace.com for a free trial. And when you're ready to launch, go to squarespace.com/ChristyAnnJones to save 10% off your purchase of a website or domain. Book number 4 on this list is the Oxford Illustrated History of Witchcraft and Magic by Owen Davies. Owen Davies is the editor, but he didn't write every single chapter in here, so it's a compilation of the perspectives of different academics on specific topics within the realm of witchcraft. You guys would have seen me reading this if you watched my like researching and writing the day in my life I filmed a little while ago. This is exactly what it says on the tin. It's a history of witchcraft and magic, and honestly, I loved this book so much. Like, if you want to get a perspective into witchcraft and magic in terms of like a historical context, this is a brilliant book to read. And so essentially, if you want some really, really in-depth insight into like this archetype, this is a good history book, while the Virago Book of Witches is a really good look at the actual stories that get told by people. And so these two probably are really good books to read together. This book is a brilliant, brilliant analysis on like the history of witchcraft. I did think that it had quite a heavy focus on witchcraft in the West. There was a chapter in here where it looked at particularly witchcraft in Africa, but I did think like if I were to say that it was going to fall down in any way, it was like quite centralized to like Western witchcraft and like the history of witchcraft in the Western world. But regardless, I felt like it was a really, really good insight into witchcraft. Like, we kick off with the first chapter, which is like the ancient history of witchcraft, and we look at the Byzantine Empire and like Mesopotamia, Jewish magic, and like in like with the Romans and like a whole bunch. I felt like I learned a lot from this book, and when I was like looking for non-fiction books to read on witchcraft and the actual history of this archetype and where it came from within like our storytelling and that kind of stuff, I did a lot of research to work out which book to get. This is the book that had like the best reviews. So in terms of a non-fiction book to read about witchcraft, I think this is a really, really good one if you want to learn more about this archetype. And so that is why I'm recommending it to you guys if you want a bit more of a non-fiction book to read for this spooky season. Okay, the next book I want to recommend is Northern Lights by Philip Pullman. This is probably the least witchy book on this list. This is probably my new book that I'm just like not going to shut up about and probably put it in like all of my recommendations, because I finished this series a couple months ago and I just loved it to absolute pieces. I thought it was so brilliantly written. I thought the story and world was so unique and wonderful. But the reason why it's on this list today is because there are witches in this story. They are side characters, unfortunately. I wish they played a bigger role. However, like the witch Serafina Pekkala, I just think she's so cool. and so interesting, and I really loved the depiction of witches in this story, and so that's why I wanted to put it on this list. This is a story about a young girl whose name is Lyra. She's living in this world in which people have demons, and the demons are like an extension of their soul. The demons manifest as like a certain creature. When you're a child, the demon will shapeshift into different animals, but when you're an adult, it solidifies and becomes a singular creature. And Lyra is living at Oxford with all of these scholars. She doesn't have close parents, and she is a very, very loud and confident little girl. She's always like getting into mischief. I really love Lyra's character. But then one day her friend Roger goes missing. He's taken by a group of people called the Gobblers, and so Lyra ends up going on this big adventure to the north to go and try and save Roger. And in so doing, she meets this very cool armored polar bear whose name is Yorick Burnison, and she also meets all of these witches such as Serafina Pekkala. Yeah, basically, love this book. I wish the witches had a bigger role to play, but like I love the depiction of witches so very much, and I think they're such interesting characters, and I love just how they exist in this world, and the fact that like they can't feel the cold, they live for hundreds of years. They're very interesting, they have an interesting witch culture. I just really, really love their depiction in this book series, and so that's why Northern Lights by Philip Pullman is on this list, even though the witches are side characters. Book number 6 on this list is a book which I have recommended to death, so if you watched a lot of these videos, I apologize. This is Charmed Life by Diana Wynne Jones. Of course, if you want to read a Diana Wynne Jones book with a witch in it, you could always read Howl's Moving Castle, because The Witch of the Waste is obviously in this, and this is a wonderful, wonderful book. However, I always talk about Howl's Moving Castle, and I feel like you guys are probably sick of me recommending this one, so I'm going to recommend Charmed Life instead, which I've also recommended a lot anyway. Charmed Life is about a boy named Cat. I think he's like 12 years old or something like that. He's reasonably young, and his sister Gwendolyn. Now their parents die in a boating accident, and because Gwendolyn is a witch, Cat clings to her. Witches cannot drown, and so they survive. And then because their parents have died, they end up going to live with this flamboyant wizard named Crestomancy in his castle. And so this is the story of like Gwendolyn and Cat going to move and live with Crestomancy. Cat is the main character. He is quite trodden on by his sister. His sister is quite a sort of conniving person. Like she's not super friendly, but I really, really love Gwendolyn's character. Like I think she's a really interesting character, and of course she is a witch. I really, really love the magic in this. I think Diana Wynne Jones does a really good job of like making beautiful, cozy, magical books. Like I just really love the vibe of the magic, and I love how she just depicts it in these stories. Again, I think Gwendolyn is a really, really interesting witch character. This is a very short book. It's a middle grade book. It's such a speedy read, but I really, really love the plot of this. It's a really, really good comfort read, and again, I love Gwendolyn as a witch. I think she's very interesting, and the depictions of magic in this are just really, really good. So that is why it is on this list. The next one is a classic. It is there's water on it, sorry, from my drink bottle, by Arthur Miller, and it is The Crucible. This book is on this list because it is a classic. Now this book I think was written, when I say book I mean play, this is actually a play, was written in 1953, and basically is a retelling, or like a fictionalized drama retelling of the Salem witch trials, which of course happened in Salem in New England. What year was it? Set in 1692 to 1693, so like 90 years after the Familiars. And so from this one you can get insight into what the witch trials were like in America. This is such a well-known play. The reason why I read this originally was because I was going to do English tutoring at my old high school, and I had to read this to become an English tutor, and then the week before I was going to start, my car broke down, and then I had to sell it for spare parts. And because I lived in the middle of heckin' nowhere, there wasn't any public transport around, and so because I didn't have a car, I physically couldn't get to the school to go and tutor English. But I still read the book. And I'm glad that I did, because it was a really interesting read. It was a very, very quick read, and it's sort of a look at like how, for want of a better phrase, the hysteria that happens to this town. The fact that, you know, people find out that like there's accusations of witchcraft, to look at how these innocent people were hurt because of everyone just like getting really, really silly and like pointing the blame, and the sort of like atrocities of like the witch trials and how many people got hurt by it. Again, it's very, very short. It's a very small little classic. This was a very, very popular play when it came out in the 50s. I think it won a Tony Award. Anyway, it's a really good read. It's a short read. It's a good look at the actual like Salem witch trials which happened, and it's also a very, very influential play and theatrical piece. And then the final book on this list is The Girl Who Drank the Moon by Kelly Barnhill. Now this is a very wholesome, nice little book. It's a book which is a middle grade. We read it for our book club, I believe a couple months ago, and overall I really enjoyed it. This is a story about a witch whose name is Zan. She lives in this like very like creepy forest which is quite dangerous, and every year, for some reason Zan doesn't know, the villagers on the edge of the forest leave a baby in the middle of the forest. And so Zan, not wanting the baby to like starve to death, picks up the baby, takes it across the forest from the mean village that abandoned it, and goes and gives it to one of the free cities where it will find a loving home. Little does Zan know that the people of the village are actually sacrificing a baby to the scary witch of the forest so that she doesn't come and attack them. Bit of miscommunication here. One year when Zan is collecting the abandoned baby who she's trying to help, she accidentally reaches up and grabs the moon's power to feed the baby. And so the baby, whose name is Luna, oh my god, her name is Luna, it's the most obvious name, and I forgot it. Okay, because she's the girl who drank the moon. Luna, okay, my brain is working today. Luna, the baby, literally drinks from the moon. She's the girl who drank the moon. Luna becomes enmagicked, and essentially she will end up becoming a witch, and so Zan decides to adopt her and keep her with her. Zan also lives with a very cute baby dragon whose name is Fyrian, and a like sort of large swamp monster whose name is Glurk. He's very philosophical. He's a poet. I really enjoyed this story. I think it's a really, really wholesome, wonderful middle grade story. I think if you're into middle grade, this is a great autumnal book to read. It's a great witchy story to read, and it's quite sweet and wholesome overall. I had a couple little criticisms with it. I wish the overall meaning of the story was a little bit deeper. Generally, I found it to be a really like fun time, a really good read, and probably the most wholesome witchy story I think I've ever read. And so I think it's a really, really cute one. I think it's a really fun time, and if you're looking for something that's just a little bit fun, that's lighthearted, that's quite a quick read, I definitely recommend this one. And so that was the very last book on this list of 8 witchy books to read for Halloween and the spooky season. I'm quite pleased with myself because this candle has been next to me the whole time and I have not knocked it over, even though it's very easily in arm's reach. Please let me know if you have any recommendations for witchy books to read. I do really, really want to read The Nature of Witches soon. I also have a whole bunch of books I want to read on my TBR, which I spoke about in my recent TBR video, which I will pop in the cards. Thank you so very much for watching, everyone, and an enormous thank you to everyone over on Patreon for supporting my channel. Please feel free to check out Patreon. There is a link in the description down below. Take care, guys, and I will see you soon. Bye bye.